This is AutoCAD. This is non-annotative dimensioning. So, assuming that you've already created a dimension style, and this is a pretty small part, so I have the text set to 1/8 of an inch. Say this part was twice the size, then I would have to set that text size. I would have to double that 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. So that's okay. I'm good to go. So you probably start off in the home ribbon, and we want to add dimensions to this. So ideally you will have a set of layers created, and I've got a dimension layer created. One thing I didn't do was I didn't make sure, I'm going to double click on that and make sure. So you can either set it to current or you can double click it and set it to current. And I'm ready to dimension with that mechanical dimension style. Dimensions are located under the annotate, and here's my ribbon for doing dimensioning. Now, a lot of times I don't use this to create my dimensions. A lot of times I will just use the dimension command and type the dimension that I want to add and place it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to properly place some dimensions on this drawing. So that one's pretty good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this dimension. This is let's say it's a universal dimension. I can dimension with it and create a vertical dimension. I could create a horizontal dimension with that tool. If you use the it's the dimension linear command. So dimension lin. If I just hit enter, I can select the whole line. So how does that work? Let me erase these dimensions and show you how this works. So this is the dimension linear, and it'll do a lot of different dimensioning for you. But if you want to be specific, you may need to use some of these other tools. Let me pin that open. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the dimension linear. Now, by clicking on it, you're more or less telling it that's what you want to do. If you were to do like a dim vertical and hit enter, right now it's wanting you to select one intersection and another intersection, and that would create a vertical dimension too. If you're using the command line to create dimensions and you're doing a vertical dimension, you hit enter and enter again, you'll get this pick box that you can just select that line. Now that's providing that this line travels the length of the part. If you have something that looks like this, where you have two lines, but because, let's say they look like this, and you're just looking at your drawing, like you can see that I just created two different lines there. But if you created your drawing like this, and you do a dimension vertical or a linear dimension, and you just select that, it's not going to go all the way to the top. So how can you edit that? You can click on it, move that node to that endpoint, and it's that easy. So let's properly dimension this thing. You don't want to double dimension, and you want to have enough dimensions. So you want to try to put all your dimensions in here between the views. You want to try your absolute best to not put any dimensions on the outside of the drawing whatsoever. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to chain dimension this drawing. So dim, and I'll go ahead and use this from an intersection to an intersection. And what I like to do is snap it to the previous dimension so that they line up. That looks pretty good. So I then need a dimension that covers the total distance. So click, click, and I'll bring that up. And you just want to make sure that you're exactly where you need to be. Let's take apart a dimension a little bit. Click it, stalled out a little. There we go. Okay, so your dimension, you can see the line ends here. And I can even, like, if I force it, oops, that's okay. If I click it, you can see the line ends here, and then there's this gap. Well, let me move this off. The end of this gap, there's a node. I can even draw a line from that node, right? Well, that node's really important. That's where the dimension actually ends. It needs to go to the point you want it to go to. So this is a chain dimension. They're connected to each other. And you want a dimension in the correct view. So like this is clearly this line here. This is the same feature, except here in the front view, this is not a great place to dimension it. It doesn't completely describe what's going on. So I would dimension, probably my biggest feature there. If that's not what you wanted to dimension, then you might want to dimension from there to there and show that that's 1 inch. Now, one thing you wouldn't want to do, you wouldn't want to dimension from that intersection here. See how I don't get, there's a gap here, but there's no gap here. I would want that node to be placed over here so that I get an appropriate gap right there. All right, so then I don't necessarily want to put another dimension here, just like I wouldn't want to put another dimension linear. Whoops, I missed a button. I wouldn't want to put one there either, because that's now double dimension, because that 0.5 is measured in this 4. So I got 0.5, 3, and then 4. You don't want to double dimension that surface, or that point. Same here. I've got 3.5 dimension here, but I don't necessarily need this 2.5 because that's double dimension that part, right? So delete that. So now I'm going to dimension horizontal from here to here. Now, it looks so much nicer when things line up. So I want this to line up with these. So I want to drag it up, but then I'm just going to, I want to put that there, right? Well, in later versions of AutoCAD, it's helping you draw those dimensions. So if I do a dim horizontal from here to here, and I drag that up, that's all well and dandy. It's not quite lined up, but if you wanted to line it up, you just draw a line coming straight across and put that down on that intersection. And then that'll look pretty good. Now, I don't need to dimension across the top here because it's already dimensioned up here. And this 0.5 is dimensioned, where this is 0.5, it's dimensioned here. So I don't need to dimension it again up there, but I do need to dimension the center line. So I would use the dimension from endpoint to the endpoint of that center line that I have drawn and bring that straight up. And I'm going to bring it straight up and just place it. Now, you can see I've got my center line, and it's got that little gap. Like I said, that's important to have that gap because it shows a difference between the center line and the dimension. Now, if I delete that center line, you get some choices. When you set up your dimension style, if you come over to, here we go, arrows and styles, you can have a mark or line or none. So if I draw it myself, I probably want the none, but if I didn't draw it myself, maybe I want the mark. So I set it and saved it as the mark. So now if I do I want to dimension the circle. So I have a choice. I can either dimension in a radius or a diameter. So anything that's a complete circle, 365 degrees, is going to get a diameter, and anything that's less than 365 degrees is going to get a radius. So if I say dim diameter, and I select that, and I bring that up, I'm going to get a diameter. And you can see it drew that center mark for me. You see my dimension line's a little different, so I'm just going to bring that down and try to connect it to that endpoint. And it'll do that for me. So you can either create your center lines or you can draw them using the mark function in the style manager. So, have I missed anything? I have. So I have this V that's going through there. So I will make a vertical dimension from here to here and just bring it over. And I will use the linear command and go from here to here to show that V. And that's pretty good. Now, if you want to make this a little bit nicer, one thing you could do is, let's say I could draw a line. And I've seen quite a few people do this. They'll just draw a line, a construction line going straight across, and they'll say offset 0.25. And or I'll just offset a part, and then I'll move that so that it's 1/4 of an inch. I'll move this so that it's 1/4 of an inch. And I'll move this so that it's 1/4 of an inch. And I come over here and I'll move these dimensions so that they're all 1/4 of an inch. It's sort of a pretty manual way of adding in locations for your dimensions. So now if I delete all those construction lines, you can see they all line up. Oh, I missed that one, huh? So I just moved that from there to there. And they all line up pretty nice. And I will go ahead and do that for all of my dimensions. So like this here, this is pretty poor drafting. There's no reason to have this little line here. This should really be one whole line. So I'm going to just connect that up to that endpoint there. Oops, I missed it. And that's the way it should be. It should be a whole line. There's no reason to have a little broken piece of line in there. That's just poor drafting. So I've got these dimensions, and I'll just offset that another 1/4. And these two, you can, and the vertical dimensions, you run into a little bit of a problem because they're wide if you have your numbers vertical to the page. And sometimes you run out of space, so you'll have to bump those over. But these are pretty good. And then this one. And what's good about this is you can use, like, it's over here, but you can use the intersection that it crosses itself as the point. And that looks pretty good. And then this one, I could take this, make that node hot, or that grip hot, snap it over, and you can see I got that vertical dimension lined up there. So that's a quick way to add non-annotative dimensions. So when I go to plot this, I set those, the text. So if you click on it, click on this, I set this text to, let's see, lines and arrows, text to 0.125. So I know that this fits on the page from previous lessons, and when I plot it, I'll center the plot. Tell it 1:1, print to plot to extents. So I'm going to make a PDF with my cute PDF writer. I'm going to tell it monochrome, and I want it in a landscape. No, I want it in a portrait. So extents, portrait on letter, 1:1. I'm going to preview it. What to do? So this is why exactly what you do a preview. Because it was in landscape and I changed it to portrait. So that looks pretty good. I've got my dimensions are all spaced right. My layers look kind of strange though. So I'm going to say cancel and see what layer I put them on. I'm going to double check my layers and make sure my dimensions, they're small. So that's right. So that's how it should come out. It'll look good in the plot. So I'll close this. Let me just actually plot it letter to extents, center the plot, 1 to 1 in a landscape, monochrome, preview it, and plot. Right click and say plot. Now I'm going to get this little dialog box, and I'm just going to place all of this and say to test plot. Save. So now, my documents, refresh this. There's my to test plot when I open it up in the Adobe Reader. There you go. I can see, rotate the view this direction. There you go. I can see in the actual plot. These are thinner. The dimension lines are thinner. I'm positive that that text is 1/8 of an inch, because that's what I told it. And that looks pretty good. So that's some quick non-annotative dimensioning.